Okay, ready to dive in.
Yep.
Today we're looking at those brain shortcuts, those mental shortcuts that sometimes make us think, like shark attacks are more common than stubbed toes.
Right.
The availability heuristic.
Yeah.
You shared some pretty interesting articles on this, so let's see what we can find out.
Yeah, it is fascinating how our minds work, right? I mean, this heuristic is all about how easily we can recall things. And
Hmm.
so if it pops into our head easily, we tend to think that it happens more often than it really does.
So, like, if I just binge watched a documentary on serial killers,
Mm-hmm.
I'm suddenly a lot more aware of everyone around me,
Exactly.
even though statistically it's much more likely I'm going to trip on my own 2 feet.
Exactly. It's not about the logic, it's about the vividness of it.
Right.
Those dramatic images stick with us, and our brains kind of go, whoa, this must be a common danger.
Okay, but hold on. You keep using this word heuristic.
Right.
That sounds kind of technical. Can you break it down for us?
Essentially, a heuristic is a mental shortcut. Our brains are these efficient machines, and they love to save energy. Heuristics help us make quick decisions without overthinking every little thing. The availability heuristic is just one type, and it relies on what's most readily available in our memory.
Okay, so it's like my brain has a favorites folder, and whatever's right there at the top of the list, that's what we think about first. So I guess it's no wonder that we end up with these
Right.
kind of a skewed perception of things sometimes. Where did this idea even come from?
Well, this is where the work of two psychologists, Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, comes in.
Okay.
Back in the 1970s, they really brought this to light. They conducted these fascinating experiments showing how these mental shortcuts, like the availability heuristic, can lead to systematic errors in our judgment.
So they didn't just observe it, they actually designed experiments. What did
Yeah.
they do?
Well, one of their most famous studies was where they asked people to estimate the frequency of words in the English language. What they found was that participants consistently overestimated the frequency of words that started with a particular letter, like K, compared to words where K was the third letter.
Why is that? Are we all just obsessed with the letter K?
Not quite. It's because it's so much easier for us to think of words that start with K, kite, kangaroo, kitchen. Our brains just readily retrieve those examples.
Right.
But trying to recall words with K as in the third letter is a lot harder, so we underestimate their frequency.
That's so interesting. So this isn't just about like random trivia and word games. This actually affects how we see the world.
Absolutely.
You mentioned how this impacts our judgment. Can you give
Mhm.
us some real-world examples of that?
Absolutely. Think about media coverage. Sensationalized stories about, say, plane crashes or
Yeah.
shark attacks can make these events seem far more common than they actually are. And that can lead to some pretty irrational fears and even influence our travel choices.
Yeah, after Jaws, I didn't swim in the ocean for a good month.
Right.
But I imagine there are some more serious implications of this as well, right?
Definitely. Let's take health decisions. If you hear this really vivid anecdote about someone having a bad reaction to a vaccine,
Okay.
it might make you hesitant to get vaccinated yourself, even if the scientific evidence overwhelmingly supports its safety.
So personal stories, even if they're just these rare one-off occurrences, can really outweigh hard data in our minds.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're wired to trust a good story over statistics sometimes.
Exactly. And this isn't limited to health. Think about financial decisions. After a market crash, many investors become overly cautious, even if the historical data shows that markets tend to recover.
Right.
But that memory of the crash is so vivid
Yeah.
and it's so emotionally charged that it just really influences their judgment.
Man, this is making me rethink a lot of things. I'm starting to see how much
Yeah.
this availability heuristic is kind of secretly pulling the strings. It makes me really rethink how I approach information now.
Well, that's the first step towards making more informed decisions. Recognizing the influence of the availability heuristic
Okay.
is key to overcoming it.
So it's not about ignoring our gut feelings completely, but
Mhm.
understanding where they come from
Right.
and checking them against the facts.
Right.
That's interesting.
Exactly.
That's powerful.
Yeah. It's not just facts versus feelings, though, right? I mean, the availability heuristic is tricky because it plays on our personal experiences.
What do you mean? You mean my favorites folder is different from yours?
Yeah.
That my availability bias is different from your availability bias?
Exactly. Imagine two people. One grows up in a rural area surrounded by nature,
Okay.
the other in a bustling city. Their perception of risk, even for something simple like crossing the street, is going to be influenced by their vastly different experiences.
That's true, yeah. The city dweller is probably much more accustomed to traffic and crowds, while someone from a rural area might be more concerned with, I don't know, like wild animals or...
Yeah, absolutely, Otter. Their individual availability databases are different, so to speak. And that's why it's important to be aware not just of our own biases, but also to recognize that other people may be operating from a completely different
Mm.
set of readily available memories and experiences.
So empathy is key.
Right.
We can't assume that everyone sees the world through the same lens, so it's about
Right.
understanding where their perception comes from. Let's get back to those marketing tactics for a second.
Right.
How does the availability heuristic play into all that?
Marketing is where things get really interesting. Companies use the availability heuristic all the time,
Oh,
whether they know it or not.
really?
Think about those jingles or slogans that get stuck in your head. They're designed to make the brand or the product really easily recallable.
Oh, man. Like that one jingle from that sugary cereal I loved as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I can still sing the entire thing, and I haven't touched that cereal in years.
Yeah. Exactly. And now imagine you're at the grocery store staring at this giant wall of cereals,
Right.
and that familiar jingle pops into your head. Suddenly, that cereal is more available in your mind. Bam! Marketing success.
So they're not just selling a product, they're planting a memory.
Exactly.
That's both brilliant and a little bit creepy. Are
Right.
there any other ways that they use this?
Billboards. Those giant ads along your commute.
Yeah.
You might not even have a slogan, just a striking image or a brand name. The more you see it, the more available it becomes in your memory.
It's like they're sneaking into my brain's favorites folder without me even knowing.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden I'm craving a burger from that place with the giant cow on the billboard.
Exactly. Marketers understand that the more easily you can recall something, the more likely you are to choose it, even if you didn't consciously want it in the first place.
This is really making me rethink my next trip to the grocery store. But is all of this just manipulation? Are there any positive ways that the availability heuristic can be used?
Well, yeah. I mean, while it is used a lot in marketing, the availability heuristic can be really beneficial in some situations. Think about situations where you need to think really quickly, like emergency response.
Okay.
First responders often rely on protocols and procedures that are easy to remember. They're
Hmm.
based on their training and experience. And in those moments, they don't have time to stop and analyze every detail.
So it's like their brain has this quick access folder
Exactly.
for emergency situations full of the most important information. In those cases, the availability heuristic is actually saving lives.
Exactly. And it can also be helpful in more everyday situations where you have to make a quick decision with limited information. Like imagine you're trying to pick a restaurant quickly.
Okay.
You'll probably just go with the one you remember most easily, maybe based on a friend's recommendation or...
Yeah, I usually just default to my favorite pizza place, even if there might be some amazing hidden gems I'm just forgetting about at the moment.
Exactly.
So it's all about balance, balancing efficiency with careful consideration.
Right.
We've talked a lot about external factors that can influence this bias, but what about internally? Does our own internal state play a role?
Our emotions definitely play a role. Research suggests that when we're anxious or stressed, we tend to remember negative information more easily.
So if I'm already having a bad day,
Yeah.
I'm more likely to focus on all the potential threats or problems around me. Like my brain is primed for negativity.
Exactly. Imagine you're walking home alone at night and you're feeling kind of on edge.
Right.
Every little sound, every shadow is going to seem more menacing
Right.
because your anxiety is making those negative associations more available.
Oh, that makes sense. It's like our emotions are putting on a pair of danger goggles that distort our reality.
Absolutely.
So how do we counter this? Do we all just have to pretend to be happy all the time?
Well, not necessarily. It's more about being mindful of your emotional state and recognizing how it might be affecting your perceptions. If you're feeling stressed or anxious, take a step back. Maybe try some deep breathing. Try to assess the situation objectively.
So self-awareness is key. We have to recognize those emotional filters
Right.
and adjust our thinking. But knowing about all this is one thing. Actually, changing our behavior is another.
Right.
Are there any practical things we can do to overcome the availability heuristic?
One effective strategy is to actively look for a wider range of information, especially viewpoints that challenge your assumptions.
You mean like if I tend to read news sources that already align with what I believe,
Yeah.
I should make a point to check out sources that offer alternative perspectives, even if it's a little uncomfortable.
Exactly. Break out of your echo chambers. Expose yourself to different information.
Yeah.
That's how you'll form more balanced, informed opinions.
Like giving our brain a workout.
Yeah.
Push past your comfort zone and
Mhm.
expand your understanding of the world.
Exactly.
Sometimes it's not about finding new information, it's about challenging the information you already have. How do
Absolutely.
you do that?
Consider the opposite of what you believe.
Wait, so you're saying that if I feel really strongly about something,
Yeah.
I should try to argue against myself?
Yes. By forcing yourself to consider that opposite viewpoint, you might uncover weaknesses in your own reasoning,
Hmm.
and maybe you'll arrive at a more nuanced perspective.
That's an interesting idea. It's like holding your own beliefs up to a mirror and seeing them from a different angle. It doesn't sound easy, but I imagine it's a good way to develop critical thinking skills.
It's an important skill in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with information.
That's true. Okay, so we've got seek out diverse perspectives and consider the opposite. What else?
Develop your statistical literacy.
Okay.
We live in a world that's driven by data, but statistics are so easy to manipulate and misinterpret. Understanding some basic statistical concepts will help you see past all the misleading headlines
Okay.
and make better judgments.
So if I see a statistic that says 9 out of 10 dentists recommend this toothpaste, I should stop and think, okay, how did they get that data?
Exactly.
What does it actually
Three, your
mean?
sample size. Who funded the study? Are there any potential biases? You have to be a discerning consumer of information.
That's a really good point. It's not just about taking in information, it's about evaluating it. Let's shift gears for a second. We spent a lot of time talking about overcoming the availability heuristic, but what about the bigger picture?
Right.
Where do we go from here? What's next for this research?
Well, that's the exciting part, right? I mean, researchers are already exploring ways to actually design interventions that can help people overcome the availability bias.
Oh, wow. So like train our brains to think differently.
Yeah. Think
Yeah.
of it as cognitive hacking. We can use our understanding of how the brain works to nudge it in the right direction
That's right.
towards better decision making.
What kind of interventions are we talking about here?
Well, there are a few promising approaches. One involves making statistical information more accessible, more engaging.
Okay.
Instead of just throwing dry numbers at people, we could use visualizations or interactive tools that really make that data come alive.
Oh, like those infographics you see sometimes that
Yeah.
break down complex information into these really easy to understand visuals.
Exactly. Another approach is to encourage people to consider a wider range of perspectives before jumping to a conclusion.
Okay.
Like, imagine a decision-making tool that prompts you to think of reasons why your initial assumption might be wrong, or to look for information from sources you wouldn't normally go to.
So almost like a built-in devil's advocate.
Exactly.
Okay, I can see how that would be helpful, especially when you're facing some kind of big decision. But
Yeah.
how do you get people to actually use these tools?
Well, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's about integrating these interventions into everyday life. Like, imagine incorporating bias mitigating strategies into education, starting from elementary school,
Yeah.
all the way up to professional training.
So basically teaching kids critical thinking skills
Yeah.
and data literacy from a really young age.
Absolutely.
If we can give them those tools early on,
Yes.
they'll be so much better equipped to handle all this as adults.
And it's not just about education, right? I mean, we could also integrate these strategies into online platforms,
Okay.
news feeds, financial apps. If we can nudge people even subtly towards more balanced information and decision making,
Yeah.
we can create a more informed and rational society.
So almost like redesigning our entire digital environment to promote cognitive well-being.
Exactly.
Instead of algorithms that are just amplifying our biases, we could have algorithms that are actually helping us to overcome them. That's pretty amazing.
Right.
This has been really eye-opening. We started with this seemingly simple concept, the availability heuristic,
Right.
and now we're talking about changing education, technology, maybe even society as a whole. It really shows how powerful it is to just understand how our minds work.
It is powerful, and this is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to cognitive biases. There's so much more for us to explore, and the more we understand about these mental shortcuts, the better we'll be able to handle all the complexities around us.
Well, I think we did a pretty good job of unpacking the availability heuristic today.
Yeah.
We explored its origins, how it impacts our lives, even took a peek into the future of the research. What's the big takeaway for our listeners? What's the one thing you really want them to remember from our deep dive today?
Be mindful of those mental shortcuts. Just because something pops into your head easily doesn't mean it's true.
Right.
Question those assumptions, seek out different perspectives, and remember your brain loves a good story,
Mhm.
but sometimes the story isn't the whole picture.
That's a great way to put it. So next time you find yourself jumping to a conclusion, stop and ask yourself, is this just my availability heuristic talking?
Mhm.
You might be surprised at what you find.
And never underestimate the power of curiosity. The more you learn about how your mind works, the more you'll be able to make informed decisions and live a more fulfilling life.
That's fantastic. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the availability heuristic. We'll catch you next time for another look into the human mind.